Colleen Stan, an American woman born on December 31, 1956, became the victim of one of the most bizarre and horrifying cases the FBI has ever seen. She was kidnapped by a couple, Cameron and Janice Hooker, who held her captive as a sex slave in their home for 7 years, from 1977 to 1984. Yes, you heard that right, 7 years. This story is so strange and shocking that it is truly considered one of the FBI's historical cases. The ordeal began on a normal day, May 19, 1977, when Colleen decided to travel to Northern California for a friend's birthday. Originally from Eugene, Oregon, she chose to hitchhike the long distance instead of taking a bus or plane. For those who don't know, hitchhiking is a form of free travel where a person stands on the side of the road, shows their thumb, and asks drivers for a free ride. These people are called hitchhikers. Colleen was an experienced hitchhiker and knew not to get into just any car. She had already gotten rides in 2 other vehicles before coming across a blue van with a man and a woman inside Cameron and Janice. A smart hitchhiker usually avoids vans because they're associated with kidnapping, but Colleen felt a bit relieved when she saw a woman in the vehicle. She even saw their small child in a car seat in the back. The atmosphere seemed completely normal and family-friendly, and she thought, who would kidnap someone with their child in the car? And so she got in. At one point during the trip, Cameron stopped for gas, and Colleen got out to use the restroom. She later said that in that moment, something in her mind screamed, "Run from the bathroom, run, and don't ever look back." But she ignored that inner warning, telling herself she was probably just being paranoid. She returned to the van. The child was still asleep, and everything seemed calm. But when they reached a secluded road, Cameron suddenly pulled over. Janice put a knife to Colleen's throat, and at the same time, they placed a special wooden box they had designed for her over her head. This box blocked out sound, light, and air, but was designed so she wouldn't suffocate. It was a complete form of psychological torture. Cameron Hooker was a lumber mill worker. From the outside, their life might have seemed ordinary, but behind closed doors, things were very dark. Cameron and Janice's relationship was anything but healthy. Cameron constantly abused Janice, who was exhausted and desperate from the situation. She had a small child, but she couldn't take it anymore. She had repeatedly objected to Cameron's brutal behavior, but he came up with a strange plan. He told Janice, "Let's kidnap a stranger so I won't bother you anymore." Although Janice was against this, she was strangely still dependent on her husband. Despite all the abuse, she didn't want to lose Cameron. She was pathologically in love with him. In the end, Janice set a condition. "If you're going to do this, we have to have another child together first. If you agree to this, I'll go along with you." Now, let's go back to the first night Colleen Stan was kidnapped. She was 20 years old. Her hands were tied, and the heavy wooden box was placed over her head. The torture began from that very first moment. It was mostly Cameron who tormented her, but Janice was not blameless either. The couple hid Colleen in a small square box under their bed. Imagine for 23 hours a day, that girl was imprisoned in that dark box. One day in 1978, Cameron presented Colleen with a contract. It stated that she was to be Cameron's permanent sex slave and serve him for the rest of her life. The box she was imprisoned in was under Cameron and Janice's bed. The wooden box was so small that she could only huddle up inside. They also put a gag on her mouth so her screams couldn't be heard. Colleen recounted that she once saw a photo of a girl in the box. Cameron had told her that the girl's name was Mary Elizabeth Spenhack, one of their previous victims. Whether this claim was true or not, no one knows, but one thing was certain. A girl by that name had actually disappeared from the same area in 1976, though no official evidence ever connected her disappearance to Cameron. One of Cameron's most horrifying tactics for controlling Colleen's mind was to create a fake story about a fictional organization. He told her there was a powerful and secret group called The Company, and that he was a member. He claimed that if she tried to escape, the company would not only torture and kill her, but also her entire family. What was the truth? This organization didn't even exist, but in her psychological state, under intense pressure, poor Colleen was forced to believe the story. Cameron and Janice had truly brainwashed her. She had become an absolute prisoner, filled with fear, silence, and hopelessness. After Colleen signed the strange contract and was thoroughly terrified by the threats about the company, it was as if she lost her identity. From then on, she was only known by the name Kay, an absolute slave who was only allowed to call Cameron master. There was an agreement between Cameron and Janice. Janice had agreed to let Colleen stay in the house on the condition that Cameron would not have full sexual intercourse with her and, of course, that their second child would be born. Cameron seemingly agreed to this, but to release his aggression, he would rape and abuse Colleen with sharp tools and various objects, something that is impossible to properly describe with words. It was a complete catastrophe. In 1978, Cameron and Janice moved to a new house in an area called Red Bluff. Colleen went with them and was once again imprisoned in a small box under their bed. That same year, the couple's second child was born. Imagine, Janice was in labor on the bed while right underneath, a human being was imprisoned, a young woman with a gag and a bruised body, confined in a small box. It's interesting to know that throughout all this, Colleen had a strong belief in God. She later said that the only thing that helped her survive was her faith. She survived for 7 long years in that horrific situation, just with hope and prayer. But Colleen's main fear wasn't just the physical torture. She feared the company most of all, the fictional organization Cameron had created for her, a powerful and mysterious group that was supposed to destroy anyone who disobeyed or tried to escape, along with their family. This very fear caused Colleen to decide to submit. She no longer resisted. She obeyed all of Cameron's orders just to be tortured less. Gradually, Cameron started to trust her, so much so that he allowed her to go into the yard, help with housework, and take care of the children. Sometimes the front door was even left unlocked. The phone was nearby, and neighbors were close, but Colleen was so terrified of the company that she didn't even consider escaping. That fear had blocked all paths to hope. In 1981, about 2 years after her kidnapping, Colleen managed to gain Cameron's trust enough to ask to see her family once. The Stan family had not heard from their daughter in 4 years. They thought she might have joined a strange cult because her appearance was disheveled, her clothes were old and dirty, and she had no money. You won't believe it, but her family didn't even dare to ask her any questions. They were afraid that if they said something, the imaginary cult would harm Colleen or even themselves. See how it had gotten to the point where not only the victim but also her family were, in effect, prisoners of fear. The day after that visit, Colleen again asked Cameron to let her see her family one more time. This time, Cameron said yes, on one condition, that he would accompany her. Colleen agreed. They went to the Stan family's home, and Cameron introduced himself as Colleen's boyfriend. Even stranger, Colleen's very happy family said, "Let's take a souvenir photo of the two of you." Yes, at the moment they thought they were taking a picture of a happy couple. The reality was that one of them was a torturer, and the other was a silent prisoner. But after returning from that visit, Cameron became angry. He said he had given her too much freedom, so he locked Colleen back in the box under the bed. The day of torment started anew. Colleen spent 23 hours a day in a small wooden box. A small container was left for her to use the bathroom, and in the remaining hour of the day, she faced physical and sexual torture. They even told their children that Kay didn't live in the house anymore, while Colleen was lying under the bed at that very moment. A hot California summer in a sealed, unventilated box, and a woman who lived in those conditions for 7 years, it's truly hard to imagine. Then, in 1983, Cameron gave Colleen some freedom again. He announced that Kay was back and would stay in the house. Cameron declared that he wanted to keep Colleen as his second wife, but Janice strongly opposed this. This is when Janice started to resent Colleen, and her jealousy began. Finally, in August 1984, Janice told Colleen the truth. She told her that an organization called The Company didn't exist and that it was all Cameron's lies. Colleen was shocked and couldn't believe it, but this small spark was the beginning of her escape. The next day, Colleen fled. She went to a bus station and called Cameron from a public phone, telling him she was leaving. Cameron cried and begged her not to leave him, but Colleen ignored his words, got on the bus, and went back home. The strange thing about the story is that for a few months afterward, Colleen was still in contact with Cameron. That fear of the company was still a part of her, and she couldn't believe it was all over. 3 months after Colleen's escape, Janice finally went to the police. She went to the police station and told an officer that her husband had also kidnapped, tortured, and then killed another woman named Mary Elizabeth, who had disappeared in January 1976, and whose case remains unsolved to this day. Although no physical evidence was found, Janice also told them Colleen's story and agreed to testify against her husband in exchange for full immunity. Based on Janice's testimony and Colleen's statements, Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 102 years in prison for kidnapping, rape, and torture with sharp tools. He was scheduled to be eligible for parole in 2022, but this date was later moved up 7 years to 2015. He applied for parole that year on April 1st, but it was denied. The court also said he wasn't allowed to apply again until 2030. Now, a few years have passed, and we've reached 2020. That famous year when COVID-19 messed everything up. If you remember, at that time, the situation in prisons around the world was very chaotic, and many inmates with lighter sentences were released. California authorities also looked at Cameron's case and told him to follow up on his parole application because he might be released in March 2021. But fortunately, that didn't happen. In September 2021, the court reviewed his case again and said, "No, dear. You are not eligible for parole." The reason was that they said Cameron was not just a sexual abuser but a violent sexual predator, and still a threat to society. In short, he has to stay in prison for now. Of course, as he gets older, he will probably be released by the end of this decade, but we hope he stays behind bars as long as possible. After everything was over and the trial ended, Colleen Stan decided to rebuild her life from scratch. She changed her last name, went to college, and started studying accounting. She wanted to forget everything and have a normal life, but life doesn't always go the way you want it to. She had a few unsuccessful marriages and gave birth to a son, but unfortunately, he also went down a bad path and ended up in prison. The exact reason is still unknown. Despite all these hardships, Colleen gradually pulled herself together and went to a support organization for women who were victims like her. There, she started helping others, perhaps to alleviate some of her own pain. Now, let's talk about Janice. After her testimony in court, she received full immunity, divorced Cameron, and changed her name. She then pursued a new career and started working in social work to help women in similar situations. Today, both Janice and Colleen live in California but have no contact with each other. And finally, a quote from Cameron Hooker himself, which he said to his lawyer, "Thank the judge for me. I have a library now, a gym, and a lot of free time to enjoy myself. This is much better than living with those two women." This is the dark story of one of the most bizarre and shocking criminal cases in America. If you like this story and video, be sure to like it. It gives me energy. And don't forget to subscribe to give me great support. Thank you.